to understand how we humans have connected to the night sky throughout history and across cultures has always been close to my heart. It shows of a shared understanding of the universe that goes back through generations.
Before this modern age of giant telescopes and space missions, humans still marvelled at the vast cosmos we inhabit, looking up as the stars and planets, the moon and the Milky Way turned above their heads.
But to understand how the early humans made the connection, we need to look to archaeology to tell us more. And it turns out it has a lot to tell us.
So tonight, we're looking at the unexpected places where astronomy and archaeology intersect. Welcome to the Sky at Night.
When I was growing up, I always thought that all astronomy was done by white guys in togas. That's what I heard.
Certainly the impression I got that it was some clever bearded Greeks doing maths, mostly with triangles, that laid astronomy's foundation.
But since then, I've discovered a whole wealth of information and found out that every culture has looked up and been amazed by the night sky.
Absolutely. So tonight, we're looking at ancient, modern and future interpretations of that night sky.
And to do that, we have teamed up with our colleagues from BBC Ideas to help us on our way.
For most of human history, understanding the sky was not the preserve of scientists, but a precious tool for our survival, for building cultures, religions, and societies, and in some places it still is. This is Orion the Hunter. You're probably familiar with his belt and sword, but if you're close to the equator, it looks a lot more like a canoe. 1,000 years ago, the Polynesians were the most accomplished navigators in the world. Up to the 11th century, they explored over 1,000 tiny islands scattered across the Pacific Ocean. One of the ways they did this was by using an ingenious memory technique. With a stone canoe built on the beach, a trainee navigator would face the sea and sit in there night after night, memorizing the rising and falling positions of the stars. When the crew was ready to depart, they would head for a star near the horizon, switching to a new one once the first either rose or set as it moved across the sky. Each sailing route required a specific sequence of stars, like a password or a musical motif.
Observations of the sun, moon and stars were just as important for ancient people on land. They used them to mark the turning of the seasons, specific events like solstices, and even the location of sacred sites. Remarkable archaeological evidence for this can be found in places from Malta to Mexico and from Egypt to Cornwall, a little closer to home. George has set off to a site in the Cornish moors to find out more about our Celtic ancestors' relationship with the sky.
The UK is sprinkled with prehistoric monuments, these mysterious stone structures that are well over 2,000 years old. Now that's long before our ancestors started leaving behind written records, so sadly the exact purpose and meaning of these sites has been lost to time.
Archaeologists have been working on them for decades, trying to dig up the past. But there's a relatively new crop of researchers that are helping to decode these sites in a different way, by looking up at the skies above them and seeing if there's any links to the stones below. I'm at Bodmin Moor to meet Carolyn Kennett, an archaeoastronomer. She's trying to piece together the history of Godiva Stone Circle, a site that will soon be open to the public.
So Carolyn, aside from being the world's coolest job title, what exactly is an archaeoastronomer?
An archaeoastronomer investigates sites like this and considers how they connect to the sky above. It's really interesting because not only looking at the sky and the movements in the sky, we're also considering the cultural connections that the people that built the site would have had to the night sky.
How old is this stone circle specifically?
So Godiva is a typical Bronze Age stone circle. We're on Bodmin Moor, and the stone circles here probably date to around 3,500 years ago.
Although this circle hasn't been carbon dated, it shares many similarities with other local Bronze Age sites that have. But there is something that sets this stone circle apart.
So this site is quite unique on Bodmin Moor. Many of the sites are down in bowls in the landscape with big hills around them, whereas we're on quite a ridgeway here. And it seems to be a mid-position where people were perhaps coming to gather to meet here specifically to look at the sky.
For the past century, this site has been hidden by trees. With the obstruction gone, Carolyn can now work out if the position of the stones had any relevance to the ancient sky above.
We have access to wonderful digital and 360 photography nowadays, and planetarian software allows us to rewind and fast forward the sky across a number of different dates, including the time when we think this stone circle would have been in position.
First, Carolyn is taking overlapping images of the stones, the basis of her 360-degree digital horizon.
These are all beautiful shots as well.
Now we've got the exact position of the stones, it's time for the software to fill in the sky.
So we know that the sky is always changing, but what changes are you actually looking for?
There are two changes. There's something called precession, which is a 26,000-year change to the position of the North Celestial Pole. So we see Polaris in that position right now. If you rewind into the Bronze Age, there would have been a different star there. The other change is a longer cycle, which is called the obliquity of the ecliptic, and it's to do with the tilt of the Earth, and it's a 41,000-year cycle. And that means in the Bronze Age that the sun rises and sets further south in the winter solstice and further north in the summer solstice.
That's a significant change.
It is, yeah.
Can we actually see on here what it looked like then?
So we can actually rewind this back in time. There you are, you're starting to set over in that direction.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What has your research actually shown so far then?
We've been able to show the alignments with the equinox are pretty bang on, but we've also found that if you were to approach from a line of barrows, you're actually going to see the moon at this position, and that's something that we've been able to replicate on the planetarium software.
These alignments suggest just how important the movements of the sun and moon would have been to the people that lived here thousands of years ago. And this is just the start of Carolyn's research.
Well, I have to say, this has been a truly fascinating outing for me, and I'm so grateful to you for inviting me to my very first stone circle.
Oh, I'm really pleased you've enjoyed it.
The Godiva Stone Circle is just one of thousands of stone monuments across the world, and a relatively small one in the grand Stonehenge scheme of things.
Stonehenge is solstitially aligned, meaning if you're approaching the entrance from the northeast, the sunset at midwinter will cut the monument neatly in half. Newgrange in Ireland does an even better job. A 19-meter passage runs the length of a long barrow, leading to a central chamber. In the mornings around the winter solstice, the sun shines directly in through a crack above the doorway. Newgrange was a tomb. So for the people that built it, ancestors, death, the sun, and seasonal renewal were probably linked. Perhaps it was the job of the ancestors to turn the sun around at midwinter, guaranteeing the return of spring. One of the most stunning examples of an ancient astronomical tool is at Chanquillo in Peru. A line of 13 towers provided a detailed solar calendar to someone viewing it from a specially built doorway.
Archaeology helps us understand the significance of these sites to ancient civilizations. But the principles that it uses are also giving us insight into a very surprising area: the evolution of galaxies. Chris has headed to the University of Cambridge's Department of Archaeology to find out how astronomers are learning from the best in the archaeological business.
Just like archaeologists, astronomers are stuck with whatever the universe gives us. An archaeologist can't ask for a different bit of Roman villa to be preserved, and I can't reach out and flip a galaxy over to see its far side. We get whatever we get. We just have to do our best to tell true stories about the past from it. I'm meeting anthropologist Professor Robert Foley and galactic archaeologist Dr. Pale Das in a room full of casts of skulls, of course. Pale, you're a galactic archaeologist. What does that mean?
So we're using archaeology here very much in the metaphorical sense, because we're obviously not looking at the history of humans. We're really trying to understand how our Milky Way evolved using stars that we can observe. We call them stellar fossils, a bit like the fossils on Earth. And even though we observe these stars now, they were actually born at different times in the Milky Way's past. So if we can measure how fast they're moving or where they are in the sky and what they're made out of, we can sort of piece together the history of our Milky Way.
So Rob, you're an anthropologist, somebody who's dealt with archaeology for a lot of your career. What do you think about this term, galactic archaeology?
Well, a bit of a surprise, really, to start with. But I think what we share with the galactic archaeologists is we're all trying to reconstruct a history we can't observe directly. We can't go out and actually create the conditions under which stars evolve or which human societies develop.
Galactic archaeology has been revolutionised by ESA's map-making satellite, Gaia. It's revealed a surprisingly complicated history of the Milky Way, full of violent mergers with other galaxies. But making sense of Gaia's observations of billions of stars needs creative thinking. Rob, how did you get mixed up in this world?
I guess by accident. I was actually giving a talk on how evolutionary biologists use trees, because everyone's familiar with the idea of an evolutionary tree. You can find one in Darwin's Origin of Species. And of course it makes sense, because from common ancestors, organisms diverge as they evolve. And I gave this talk, and Paolo Joffre, who was the sort of first person who really got this all going, came up to me afterwards and said, "Can we try this with stars?" And I have to say my first answer was no. For the reason that you've got to have some mechanism by which stuff, in our case, of course, it's DNA, is transmitted from one generation to another. So how do stars actually develop, and is there a process of heritability? And indeed, there is.
What is it that stars are inheriting?
All stars are born from gas, and we call this gas the interstellar medium, the gas that exists between stars. And so from that, you have the birth of these stars, and then over time, when the most massive stars die, they basically eject all this material, and that's put back into this gas reservoir. And then the next generation of stars is going to be born from this new gas.
Chemical elements are transmitted from one generation to the next as stars die and form from these clouds of gas. But would this inheritance really be enough to make an evolutionary tree for stars work?
So our first paper, back in 2017, we chose a very small sample of stars for which we really trusted the chemical abundances. So I think it was 22 stars. And we applied these techniques. We were sort of reaching out in the dark here, and then we just couldn't believe what we saw. The first tree we made was like, that's a bit like the thick disk, that's a bit like the thin disk. So these
different bits of the galaxy.
Exactly. And there was a group of stars that we didn't really understand as well, that came out as possibly ancestral to these disk components.
That's a remarkable result, finding not just known parts of our galaxy on different branches, but deeper within the tree, a group of fossil stars, ancestors to the others. More detailed trees with more stars later confirm the existence of this ancestral group. And that small team from 2017 has now grown into an international collaboration of astrophysicists and anthropologists, biologists and mathematicians.
I realised that I think astronomers had been doing it all wrong, essentially. We're always trying to work out how different stars are. But I think what's been really refreshing about talking with Rob and evolutionary biologists in general is they're trying to work out how connected stars are, not how separate they are.
We were very ignorant in each other's fields. And you can only start to work together if you're prepared to express that ignorance. In other words, I really don't know, I don't understand. And that requires trust and friendship to be able to build the shared knowledge.
It's always fun when you spend time with two scientists having that much fun working together, especially when they come from such different backgrounds. But I think their collaboration's still deep in the roots of their tree, and I'm looking forward to seeing what branches develop.
Exciting results like this come from looking out into space and asking why. something we've done for centuries as we ponder the stars above us. But in the modern world, our relationship with the night sky is changing.
With the development of complex technologies such as GPS, most humans no longer rely on the sun, moon, and stars to travel or to organize their lives. Just as well, because light pollution is increasing globally between 2 and 10% year on year. Only 1 in 5 people in Western Europe and America can now see the Milky Way. But birds need the stars, including the North Star, to navigate. If they can't see them due to light pollution from cities, they run into trouble. Denying animals access to the stars is just one of the many ways in which light pollution impacts nature.
Anyone that likes to look up at the stars will know the problem of trying to find a spot to get the clearest view. Excess light from towns and cities up to 120 miles away can still spill over into the night sky, hiding the stars. But there are places all around the world where people are working hard to preserve that nocturnal view. Back in 2011, Exmoor National Park was awarded International Dark Sky Reserve status. Over the years, a lot of work has gone into ensuring the area's lights are kept to an absolute minimum, and that allows incredibly clear views of the stars up in the sky. That's when the weather allows it, of course. To find out why places like this are so important, I'm meeting Joe Richardson. If somebody asked you, how would you explain the importance of a dark sky reserve?
I think they've become more important as time has progressed. But I think in an ever-changing world with more population, more development, I think it's really important that we have these sacred spaces where we can escape to and experience truly dark skies, not just for stargazing, but obviously to protect the ecology as well. There's actually been a lot of research to do with human health, because we know that light polluted skies has an effect on the human body and circadian rhythms.
Recent research is finding light pollution not only disrupts our sleeping patterns, but could also be linked with the risk of diabetes, strokes, and even cancer. And it's not just us humans that it's harming.
Research has shown with lots of animals, certainly nocturnal animals, their behaviour, breeding, feeding patterns are all changing. And even things such as insects, we've got evidence of insects coming out at night when you know they're meant to be out in the day. So it's certainly very important, and it's very important here on Exmoor National Park because, as we say, it's not just about stargazing. We also have to look about after the ecology of the park as well.
So for people at home, is there anything they can do to improve the situation?
We often say it's not about turning all the lights off. We don't expect everybody to live in the dark.
No.
What we do expect perhaps is for people to be more aware of it and use the right type of lighting in the right circumstances, and obviously only when it's needed. Things like, for example, using red light if possible. It's not as bad for your night vision as is bright white light. Pointing lights downward, pointing up into the sky is pointless. You need to aim your light.
That's a good slogan. Use that one.
You need to aim the light exactly where it's needed, as opposed to just allowing it to spill over.
It's work like this that's done across the whole of the Exmoor Dark Skies site that allows for stunning views like these. We're hoping to go out later tonight to do a night walk. Weather looks a little bit iffy.
Yes, it does, and it's not that great at the moment. It's actually quite frustrating. However, we often have Plan B.
Right.
And Plan B is that we will stay in the warmth of the tea rooms and we'll have a look at the night sky in a virtual way instead. So it's still a lovely evening.
That's exciting. I've got my fingers crossed that the weather improves for us tonight. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you later.
Thank you. If this was the size of the sun, look, she's even acting it. It's fantastic.
Though the weather didn't improve, Plan B was fun. But with so much to see in the coming months, I'm keeping my fingers crossed for clear skies. You don't need fancy equipment to enjoy the night sky. Your eyes will do just as well. And there's plenty of bright things to look out for, including the planet Venus. But you will have to wait until towards the end of the year for an easy view of the planet. Luckily, on the 4th and 5th of December, the waxing crescent moon will make locating Venus very easy. Wait until the sky has darkened after sunset from around 5 p.m. Locate the moon, which will be low and near the southern horizon. Then look for the bright light of Venus, perfect for spotting with the naked eye. So if you're an absolute beginner, this is an easy one to start with. Another planet in a great position is Jupiter, which is currently prominently bright, beautifully presented against the exquisite stars of Taurus. Again, the moon can be used as a locator for this planet. And on the nights of the 16th and 17th of November, the bright gibbous moon sits near Jupiter. For the more advanced stargazers, as it approaches opposition, there is great potential to see some amazing moon and moon shadow transits. On the night of the 8th of December, don't miss the giant moon Ganymede, that's the largest moon in the solar system, crossing Jupiter's disk, virtually touching its shadow as it goes. The event starts around 10:30 on the night of the 8th of December and concludes around 0050 on the morning of the 9th of December. You can also see Io in sync with its shadow from 0356 until 0608 on the morning of the 9th of December. And moving closer to home, we've got the planet Mars, which is looking pretty good as we head towards the end of the year. And there's an interesting project you can do which involves tracking the planet against the background stars. Mars heads towards the Beehive cluster M44 in Cancer the Crab during November. However, as it moves to a position just to the northwest of the cluster stars, its apparent direction in the sky reverses. Before the 6th of December, Mars moves in a prograde or west to east fashion. After this date, it's moving in a retrograde manner, east to west. This will continue until the 24th of February, when the planet once again reverses its direction to head east once more. Eventually, it will catch up with the Beehive, appearing to pass across the cluster in May of 2025. This odd motion is caused by the difference in orbital speeds between the Earth and Mars. And don't forget, there's also the Mars occultation in December that I detailed in the last episode. As ever, if you take any photos, do share them on our Flickr page. We'd love to see what you've captured of the sky above you. Here are a few which we've received recently.
Humanity's relationship with that beautiful night sky forms a huge part of our heritage. So how do we preserve it for generations to come? Back in Cambridge, Maggie's at the Whipple Museum, home to incredible objects like this magnificent orrery from 1750, used to model the intricate motions of our solar system.
We keep objects like this in museums because they're important to our history. And it's not too much of a stretch of the imagination to realise that many of the artefacts that we've put into space also have a cultural significance.
Telstar 1, the world's first active communication satellite, is still up there in orbit. While it is now technically defunct, it is an important part of our history. Without it, we might not be able to communicate in the ways we are used to today.
Because of the success of satellites like Telstar, I'm now able to speak to friends and family in an instant, but also speak to experts. In Australia, for instance. Hello, Alice. Can you hear me?
Hello, Maggie.
Associate Professor Alice Gorman is an archaeologist, heritage expert, and an internationally recognised leader in the exciting new field of space archaeology.
I believe you can be called Dr. Space Junk. Why did you acquire this title?
The very first time I started to think about space archaeology, when I was just looking up at the stars, I had a revelation. And I suddenly thought to myself, there's space junk up there and it's an archaeological record. And that was it. Like I was hooked. My entire career changed from that moment.
Space junk and satellites present a particular conundrum for archaeologists like Alice. While defunct satellites crowd our orbit and satellite megaconstellations create light pollution and alter the night sky, there are some satellites that have cultural significance.
We say that all of the stuff in Earth orbit that's not an operating satellite is junk, and that's not strictly true. I'm interested in spacecraft which have historic or scientific or social or spiritual significance. We know we've got to get rid of some space junk. We know it's a big problem, but you have to be able to discriminate between what has value and what doesn't. Well, think of, Paleolithic archaeology, hundreds of thousands of years in the past. If somebody at that point had stopped to think, well, what might people in the future like to have more of, and started preserving that, we'd be in a very different situation right now.
There are hundreds of sites and objects on the moon that hold huge cultural significance for humanity. And preserving them becomes more and more challenging as we continue our exploration of the lunar surface.
There's a common idea that the boot prints on the moon, for example, will stay safe, untouched for millions of years, so that we don't have an atmosphere, we don't have microbes, jungles, watercourses, all of these things that degrade human materials. But it's still actually a really active place. It's constantly bombarded by tiny micrometeorites, sometimes larger ones as well. And now we're adding human rockets to the things that bombard the surface of the moon.
The boot prints of the Apollo 11 astronauts already hold so much meaning for humanity. But their cultural significance actually goes beyond what most of us know about their story.
There is a really important factor in all of those Apollo sites where women have played a big role. To sew the Apollo spacesuits, they had to get expert seamstresses. And these are the women that made the spacesuits that kept the men alive. And when they stepped out of the spacecraft, those famous boot prints are actually made by overshoes that they had to pull on. These overshoes were discarded on the moon. They're part of the artifacts they've found on the surface. But they were made by women. So we could look at these boot prints as they were made by the foot of a man, but the hand of a woman.
It still feels a bit weird to be talking about the archaeology of space, because the space era is so young. And yet, I think it makes sense to ask the right questions now, work out what we want to preserve in terms of our space heritage for generations to come, in maybe thousands of years' time. So that's it for this episode, and indeed this series. But we will be back in the new year.
Until then, you can find all of this year's episodes on the BBC iPlayer. If you want to see the full version of the animation that we showed you earlier, it and many others can be found on BBC Ideas.
In the meantime, do get outside and do keep looking up, because it's important for all of us.
So until next time, good night.
New discoveries, natural wonders and strange mysteries all waiting to be discovered. Voyage across the solar system in Brian Cox's new series on BBC iPlayer.